Welcome to episode 1 of Travelling Science. G'day legends, welcome back to Travelling Science, the podcast that's sharing science with the world. My name's Jesse Crow and I'm the Travelling Scientist coming to you today from Melbourne in Australia. I'm a health science communicator and on this podcast I interview researchers, doctors and experts, sharing their stories and ideas that can help you to live a smarter, happier and healthier life. Today's guest is Nobel laureate Professor Peter Doherty. Professor Doherty trained as a veterinarian before making a discovery that went on to win him the Nobel Prize. He was also named Australian of the Year. He's published over 500 research papers, authored over 8 books, and he has a street and 2 buildings named after him. But not only has Peter Doherty achieved so much in his life, he's also incredibly generous and very interesting as a human being. In our conversation today, he tells us things like how to win a Nobel Prize, what we can learn from the pandemic, the problem with mass vaccination, why the flu vaccine changes every year, the difference between COVID and influenza, why Donald Trump sucks, and we discuss topics like superinfection, long COVID, alternative sources of energy, thorium reactors, the population crisis, nuclear war, and spirochetes. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly share a review of the show with you. This week's review comes from Crashy Apples, who's super stoked. She said, "Jesse, your YouTube channel has inspired me for years, and I can't wait to hear more from this podcast. Keep up the good work." Well, cheers, Crashy Apples. I'm really glad that you enjoy the Travelling Scientist YouTube channel, and this podcast is essentially an extension of that, so I really hope you keep listening in every Science Sunday. And for anyone who's listening now, please take the time to leave me a review to help get this show off the ground. I truly appreciate it, and I could be reading out your review next week on the show. Now let's get into this week's episode with our special guest, the one, the only, Professor Peter Doherty. Professor Peter Doherty, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and speaking with us.
It's a pleasure.
For scientists such as myself, you're certainly a hero and inspiration, but for some people that might not know you personally, would you be able to just give us a brief sort of summary and maybe some of the key points of your career through science?
Well, I'm a senior scientist. I was born in 1940, so that makes me very senior. I'm no longer running a research laboratory, though I did for more than 50 years. I trained initially in veterinary science at the University of Queensland, a very long time back. Did veterinary research on infectious diseases of domestic animals for 10 years, then returned to Australia from Edinburgh, where I'd done a PhD, and I was working as a veterinary neuropathologist, and returned to Australia to spend a brief time at the John Curtin School of Medical Research in Canberra, because I wanted to learn more about the then emerging field of T-cell mediated immunity. The plan after that is that I would have joined the CSIRO Division of Animal Health, and I would have probably ended my career maybe 15 or 20 years ago at the Animal Health Laboratory in Geelong. As it was, when I was at the Australian National University, I got together with a young Swiss colleague who'd come there to work with someone else, actually, but we ended up in the same small laboratory because there wasn't much space, named Rolf Zinkernagel, a Swiss medical graduate, about 4 years younger than me. And together we made a very big discovery about how T-cells work. That meant I was then a figure suddenly well known, or more or less overnight, due to our publications, and I was suddenly in the medical research area, which makes me an MD, which is a mouse doctor, because it was basically experiments with viruses and immunity that were my sort of stock through my career. I worked subsequently in the United States twice, again at the John Curtin School, and I've been at the University of Melbourne since 2002, where we've established a very strong program in human T-cell immunology. Really my colleague, Catherine Kidziarska, who worked initially with me as a postdoc, and then as I got older, I was handing over the research dollars I had to younger people to build up their careers. So that's me. Over the last few years, I've been focusing more and more on public science communication, writing books and so forth.
This guy has written some incredible books. I've got his very first one, The Beginner's Guide to Winning the Nobel Prize, but since then he's written 7 more, including A Light History of Hot Air, Sentinel Chickens, What Birds Tell Us About Health in the World, Pandemics. This guy actually wrote a book all about pandemics before the pandemic happened. He also wrote Knowledge Wars, The Incidental Tourist, talk about traveling scientist, Empire, War, Tennis and Me, and the most recent one, An Insider's Plague Year. So if you want to learn some incredible insights into how our world works, pick up one or all of Peter Doherty's books from wherever you get books nowadays. There's a lot to unpack there. The first and foremost I'd like to point out is that you said you sort of became an overnight success, but that was actually a little bit of time in the making. Is it correct that it was about 20 years after you made the discovery that was actually acknowledged by you and Rolf winning the Nobel Prize?
Science is divided up into many, many fields and many, many subfields. And so we became two totally unknown guys, two young guys, totally unknown, became instantly known across the immunology community. A lot of people didn't agree with we made a discovery and then we wrote a hypothesis about what this discovery meant, which was in some ways a different theory of how the immune system works. A lot of people didn't accept that, but we were well known. We were either famous in a positive sense or we were notorious because a lot of people didn't agree with our interpretation. Within 10 years, people using totally different techniques and making use of what were then new technologies showed that we were essentially right. And so then another 10 years later, we got the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize followed, it was 22 years after the initial discovery. That's not unusual for Nobel Prizes. They're often that sort of time frame.
True. Well, I'm glad that you and Rolf both did get that recognition, and your discovery has gone on to impact millions, if not billions, of lives, I'm sure. Another thing you did mention in there is that sort of after that, and certainly in more recent years, you sort of switched to more science communication, partly because a lot of people were reaching out to get the opinion of someone such as yourself.
Yes, what happened was the Nobel Prize was in 1996. And normally the year after you get a Nobel Prize, you're extremely busy because everyone wants the latest Nobel Prize winner to give their big name lecture at their university. That lasts for a year or so. But on Christmas, the Nobel Prize recipients are announced on the first Monday of October each year in medicine. Medicine is the first one announced. And then you have to turn up in Stockholm, Alfred Nobel's hometown, on December the 10th, to be there for December the 10th to be awarded the prize. That's the Alfred anniversary of Nobel's death. So by the time I turned up in Stockholm, I already had a very busy year planned for 1997. And what happened then was that I got contacted by the Australian representatives of the Australian government, I guess, telling me that I'd been named as the 1997 Australian of the Year. The mechanism for doing that was very different from the one now. It was just a committee of people who sat around in Sydney with a couple of bottles of Grange, I think, and they put a pin in the board. And if you won a Nobel Prize, you were it. Okay, even though I was living in Memphis, Tennessee, working at a place called St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, very famous place, in a very strange place. So I got this call on Christmas Eve saying, you've been made the Australian of the Year. And I said, can I put it off for a year, please? And they said, well, if you ever want to come back. So we went back, my wife Penny and I went back to Australia, I think 3 or 4 times through that year, talked in all the capital cities, and talked in the type of forum that I wasn't accustomed to. I'm accustomed to talking in scientific meetings. I was well known in that context, but totally unknown in a public sense. Nobel Prize changes that, it puts you on the public stage. And I was fielding all sorts of questions from people in the audiences and learning how to deal with them. And that really, I was fielding questions on natural foods and all this sort of stuff, and also on climate change, actually. And I really found that there was a real need for people to be speaking out publicly on a number of these issues. You get tired, actually, of this activity. It's exhausting. And so I found myself in a different situation, and I realized that this was very important. But so I learned public science communication on the job as an amateur. That's basically.
Well, that's incredible. And I'm so glad that you won those prizes, as well as many more prizes. I'm not going to list them all here. Actually, I am. Professor Peter Doherty has won many awards and accolades for his work, including the Paul Ehrlich and Ludwig Darmstädter Prize in 1983, the Canada Gairdner International Award in 1986, the Albert Lasker Award for Basic Medical Research in 1995, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1996, and in 1997 he won both Australian of the Year and the American Academy of Achievement's Golden Plate Award. And to top it all off, since 2003, they've been giving out Peter Doherty Awards for excellence in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Ironically, this is probably the only science award that Peter Doherty himself has not won. If we could just touch briefly on the COVID-19 pandemic and a few of your thoughts on that, and then I'd love to get into talking about climate change as well, which you alluded to just before. What are your thoughts about how we responded as a human race, I suppose, to COVID-19? I mean, you wrote the book on pandemics. That's one of your many books was all about pandemics 7 years before COVID-19 actually happened. So
I wrote a book on pandemics. There are lots of books on pandemics. They're usually of the shock horror. We're all going to die with black stuff coming out our nose and ears. That sort of book. And I was asked to write a book for a series, what's called Pandemics, Whatever Everyone Needs to Know. Pandemics for Dummies, basically. It's from Oxford University Press. So I wrote about it, and I wrote reasonably about it, and what I thought was the risk, what the problems were, and all the rest of it. And it's reasonably okay. I mean, in hindsight, it's fine. But it didn't sell very well because it didn't have the shock horror, we're all going to die stuff, and it didn't have the story of little Johnny and all that crap. So I'm not that sort of writer. And it was vastly outsold by the Catholic Church, what everyone needs to know, which is much more interesting. So basically, we've had 3 pandemics in the era of modern science, 3 virus pandemics. We've had the 1918-19 influenza pandemic, and I'd been working for years on influenza, among a few other things. We had the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which started in 1981, and basically is still going. And we've had the 2019, just almost 2020, COVID-19 pandemic, which is still going. And I think we've had regular sort of what we call pandemics of influenza, but nothing terribly severe like the 1918-19 one. And this was the first what we call virgin soil pandemic caused by a respiratory virus. And we got reports of a lot of people dying in China, and everyone was pretty scared. And Australia reacted very, very strongly, in fact, which was the right thing to do at the time.
do you think there are perhaps, what do you think some of the silver linings are, maybe some of the benefits that came out of the pandemic?
Well, the benefit will be if we take the trouble to learn from it. That means we need to fund people to go into real depth and analyze what happened and how best to handle these situations. What happened was, if we're talking about public health policy, which is not my field, but I've been watching it as we all have, and I've experienced it, of course, because I was locked down for months in Parkville. I think we need to look at the different experiments that were done across the planet. For instance, Sweden did one sort of experiment. They didn't lock down nearly as hard as a lot of other places. And various American states were very different. Washington state wasn't that different from us. It's liberal, Democrat, at least in the big urban centers. But some of the conservative Republican states didn't lock down much at all, like Florida, for instance. So we need to learn how best to handle it. Also, at the beginning, we were getting reports of high death rates. And that was because we were looking at death rate in terms of people who developed symptoms. So we had the impression, 1 to 2% of people were dying, which is a bit like the 1918-19 flu pandemic, which was truly terrible. But in actual fact, once you get the diagnostics right and you start diagnosing everyone who's infected with a sensitive test like PCR. We found that death rate's more like 0.3%. And it's really, really targeted into the elderly and into people with some problem with their immune system. The group that funded vaccine development, CEPI, really wanted to get vaccine to everyone on the planet. In actual fact, if you think in terms of developing countries, the severity of the disease was such that it wasn't all that great an idea to give a lot of people vaccine, because if you have mass vaccination in a country with a very, very limited public health budget, you actually take money away from all the other things that need to be done. So maybe that's not what we should be doing with a disease of that severity. Obviously, if the disease was killing 1% or 2% or 10%, that's a very different ballgame. But so that's the sort of lessons we need to learn from this. The World Health Organization will look at a lot of this stuff, and they have some very good people who will do analyses, and some of our local people will do it too. But I think we need to look at it from not just the medical aspect, not just the public health aspect. We need to look at it from the sociological aspect, economic aspect, every possible one. We need people with all expertise going in there to look at it. I'm going to try and write a synthesis myself, but I'm not right across it, so it'll be fairly superficial in some areas.
Well, I'll be hanging out for that book personally.
Yeah, I feel it's kind of dirty because most other people are too busy to do that, and they've moved on. Most of my colleagues are flat out. They're writing research grants, doing research, and so forth. So I'm kind of in the position I can take the time to do that, and it will take time.
Well, my understanding was that you were actually looking towards retirement when COVID-19 first happened. So that sort of held you back and kept you working when you'd probably rather be.
Well, retirement for someone like me, I mean, you can't. It's hard to totally retire if you're a Nobel Prize winner, actually, because people still want things from you. But I was looking to quit my university job, which I was only working at 1 day a week latterly, because I was writing a book on tennis, which has got nothing to do with science.
Empires, War, Tennis, and Me.
It's a family. It starts with a family story, but so it's a family biographical type thing partly. So I was going to sort of quit and at the end of 2019 and actually retire from my 1 day a week job, and then suddenly by mid-year I was doing a 6 day a week job in public communication. I was very, very busy because what I found was we had a regular meeting of the group leaders in the Institute 3 times a week initially in the morning, and everyone would just say very frankly what they were doing. And I learned a lot, actually, because I learned exactly what was going on in the diagnostic labs, because our institute combines an academic department, a very good one, with diagnostic virology, diagnostic microbiology, and the clinical doctors who work across in the hospital and look after the patients. So it's a big mix. I also realized, though, that all these people, they're top-level people, and that means they're on international committees. So that meant a number of them are on committees at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning in Europe or the United States. So I thought, well, I can at least take some of the public communication load off other people. So I took that on.
Oh, you're a good man, Peter.
Well, it was interesting anyway, yeah.
Absolutely. I think everyone wanted to know as much as they could about it at that point in time.
Yeah, but a lot of the stuff we were telling people early on, I wouldn't tell them now, actually, because we understand a lot more. I mean, science is about data. It's basically, you need data, and we didn't have data on this thing. We were all thinking of it like influenza, even though we were saying it's not influenza. But it has features that are totally different. Firstly, very easy to get superinfection, even with the same virus. That doesn't happen with influenza. You don't get superinfected with the same virus for the next 50 years.
Superinfection sounded scary, so I looked it up. And it is. Turns out superinfection is when you get infected with a pathogen like COVID-19, and then you get a second infection superimposed on the first, like influenza. Imagine having COVID and the flu at the same time. That would really suck.
And then the other thing was influenza is not what we call a systemic disease. The virus just infects the respiratory tract. You get systemic effects due to chemicals like cytokines being made and getting into the bloodstream. But COVID is different. The virus gets into the blood. It infects, once it's in the blood, it will infect cells in the heart, can infect cells in endothelium, the lining of blood vessels, the kidney, And it also is what we call a coagulopathy. It causes blood clots. And that's totally different from the way influenza works. And then, of course, we have this other phenomenon of long COVID.
Long COVID, also not fun, is when you have symptoms for months or even years after the initial COVID infection. Symptoms include fatigue, shortness of breath, brain fog, changes in taste and smell, coughing fits, fevers, joint and muscle pains, heart palpitations, and apparently the best way to recover is just rest and recover for a really long time. And the best way to prevent long COVID is by protecting yourself from COVID. You can get vaccinated or wear a mask or just avoid human contact altogether. Easy, huh? All right, I'd like to step away from COVID-19. When I was studying immunology personally, going through university, I always had this dream that I wanted to cure a disease, save millions of lives. But learning more about the world and about science, I feel like it's conflicting because the global population continues to grow, and as you talk about and write about a lot, climate change is becoming a serious issue. So my question is, how do you feel about the current global population in regards to climate change?
Well, it's population that's driving it, obviously, and also better standards of living in a number of countries. The higher your standard of living, the more energy you use, the more you're likely to get on an international jet, and the more you're contributing to climate change. But I don't personally have a solution to that. That requires very high-level policy decisions and buy-in from other human beings. So maybe, species don't last forever. And we may see ourselves off the planet, quite frankly. We do know that if people that, say, in developing countries, are the very poor, their only social security is their children. So we do know that if you can protect the health of children, birth rates will tend to fall. What does upset me a lot is so-called conservatives who block the rollout of global health programs, especially for women, because they're worried about terminations of pregnancy or they're hostile to contraception. I think these people are mad. It's the one criticism I have of the current Pope, for instance, who, though he's very good on climate change, and so were the last two popes, still wants to see more and more children being born. I think we need, in some way, to stabilise the size of the human family. If we don't stabilise it, we will be stabilised, basically.
Yeah, by force.
Nature will fight back, or we'll get into such terrible situations that we will have serious wars. And if we have a nuclear war, of course, we may not survive.
True. Oh, I didn't even think we'd be getting into nuclear war territory just yet.
I think if you continue to have the sort of problems with food, water availability, tensions between borders, between nuclear powers, China and India, for instance, the tension we're currently seeing in Russia and Ukraine, where you've got a Russian president who is totally crazy, as far as I'm concerned. These are very dangerous situations.
Well, I wonder do you think that there's anything that could be done at an individual level?
It all has to be done at an individual level. It all has to be done at a national level and an international level. I think we're moving far, far too slowly. Clearly, the current government is moving quicker than the previous one, but basically they're moving far too slowly. We're continuing to invest in fossil fuel extraction, in expanding fossil fuel extraction and sale. And basically that's insane. We should be talking a lot more about nuclear power. We should be looking at people are concerned about the dangers of fission reactors. We should maybe be talking more about thorium reactors. Who's even working on this stuff?
So I heard thorium reactors and I thought, sounds cool. Turns out thorium reactors have nothing to do with Thor. But they are like nuclear power plants fueled by thorium instead of the more traditional fuel uranium. And the advantages of thorium include its abundance, its energy potential, its reduced waste production, and its inability to be weaponized. So why aren't we using thorium reactors yet? Well, that's a whole other topic for a whole nother episode.
I can't see the Northern Hemisphere getting away with just renewable energy. And we've seen that. We've seen Germany closed its old nuclear plants, which were due to be closed anyway. They were beyond their use-by date. But using more fossil fuels and even starting to dig coal again. We have a massive amount of coal being dug in China. which is crazy. I mean, the Chinese are capable of doing better, but I'm not sure what they are on about, and sort of banging the war drum is the stupidest thing on earth.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I think everyone's individual vote is important, and voting for the right politicians could probably help. But like you said in a lot of your writing, actually, politicians and scientists don't often see eye to eye. I know.
The politicians have to work. They have to get elected for a start, and so they're often very dependent on rural electorates, which are locked into things like mining. That's a really big problem, sociological. We've just seen the situation with logging in Victoria, logging the old forest. I mean, it's a crazy thing to do, but then once you stop it, you're going to kill some small communities, which is terrible, and you don't want to do that. And so, but it has to go. And so coal and fossil fuels have to go, and we don't have our proper substitutes, and it's not moving. On the research side and on the technological development side, as well as the political side, the alternative is not moving fast enough. We need much more investment. I think investing in nuclear submarines, okay, but I'd rather see that go into trying to expand our use of geothermal energy and into developing much faster a lot of alternatives. I think if we can make exportable alternatives in Australia, like green hydrogen, even if that long-term battery link works up in the Northern Territory to Singapore, that would be a much greater contribution. And I understand the need to keep our defence high, because we're going to be more threatened, because there's going to be large numbers of people displaced across the planet, and we've got a lot of land, even though a lot of it's not that usable.
True. Well, some great ideas there. Thank you so much, Peter, for pointing those out. And maybe there's many things there that we need to be acting on and looking towards in the future to start making these changes that need to happen. Or like you said, there's going to be wars and climate change and some serious consequences.
That is the risk, I think. And I think that's a very real risk. People worry about nuclear power plants. I'm much more worried about nuclear war.
Do you have any book or movie recommendations for people that would like to learn more or perhaps take action in this sort of area?
A good place to start is with climate change is the IPCC synthesis report. This has just come out pretty recently. It's a report for policymakers, so anyone can read it. If policymakers can read it, anyone can read it. And so it's AR6. And so I'd start with that, which tells you it's always conservative, because the IPCC...
The IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And why should we listen to them? Well, the professor is about to explain that.
It only works from published material, which means it's peer-reviewed and published, and the synthesis report has to be signed off on by all member governments, so it is conservative. But it's a good place to start. But there are good climate websites, and also, for instance, Alan Finkel, our former chief scientist, has just published a book on energy alternatives for Australia.
Alan Finkel is the former chief scientist of Australia, and his book is called Powering Up, Unleashing the Clean Energy Supply Chain. And it's basically a script for exactly what needs to happen over the next few decades to essentially save our planet from turning into a great ball of fire.
I'm needing to get hold of one of those and start to read it, because I think Alan's very much across this space. He's a clever guy.
Peter, I'd like to talk about yourself for a moment, if that's all right. We talked a little bit about immunology, your scientific background, and your interest in climate change. And I'm just wondering about you as an individual. You've lived a long, healthy life, and you're doing well, and you're still communicating and doing great things into your 80s. I'm wondering if you have any personal wisdom or life advice, sort of like things that you've done to get where you are, and any recommendations.
Looking around at people of my age in Australia, my personal advice would be don't listen to them. A lot of them are ultra-conservative. They're locked into their own self-interest, and they read Murdoch newspapers. I mean, they're beyond appalling. I think we're an appalling generation, quite frankly.
Peter is so self-deprecating here. Yes, your generation made a few huge mistakes, but you, Professor, have done so much for the human race. Now, share with us your advice for the next generation.
Think everything through for yourself. Try to break it down into first principles. Don't buy into conspiracy theories. Try and find good sources. I mean, Wikipedia is always a good place to start. It's pretty sound. But try and find good information. Don't buy into crazy conspiracy stuff. There's a lot of nutcases out there. I mean, I get stuff on Twitter. Not only do they believe that the vaccines were equivalent to what Dr. Mengele did in concentration camps in World War II, which is insane.
Dr. Josef Mengele was known as the Angel of Death. He was a German officer and physician during World War II, and he was well known for performing deadly experiments on prisoners in concentration camps. Bad, Josef. Very, very bad.
Because all these vaccines went through a whole rigorous clinical trial process and so forth. But they also think viruses don't exist. It's beyond belief. I mean, these people are nuts. So basically, think things through, think of consequences, and think what needs to be done, and be prepared to back that. When I think a previous government said, well, we have to supply coal and gas, because if we don't, someone else will. I think Bob Brown pointed out that's the drug dealer's defence.
It's not a very good argument, is it? It
It
doesn't
is.
really work.
The drug dealer's defence. Okay, so think about cocaine. It's terrible, ruins families, kills people, horrible. But it only kills people. If you think about climate change, it kills people, or will eventually kill more and more and more and more people. It also degrades lives across whole societies and communities. And basically, it kills other species as well. I mean, species live within a climate envelope, particularly warm-blooded species. Birds are very, very sensitive to excess heat. They're sensitive themselves. They don't sweat, unlike us. And their eggs are very sensitive to excess heat. And that same's true for turtles and so forth. So an untended egg, for instance, really problematic. And a bird can't move its eggs. Once a bird has laid an egg, it can't move it. Small mammals can duck into caves and find a cool place. Birds' eggs can't.
I've read your book, Knowledge Wars, as well, where you talk a lot about that, being careful who you believe, where you get your information from. And I think that's super important.
The Knowledge Wars, I'm proud of that book because it's pre-Donald Trump. And I got a chapter on invented narrative and deliberate ignorance, which absolutely describes Trump. He called invented narrative fake news, which he invents all the time because he lies every time he opens his mouth. But this disgusting man is still on the global political scene.
And you're not alone with those thoughts, Peter.
No, I'm sure.
I assure you. I'm glad you wrote that. I remember reading that before he was elected, and
Yes.
Chaos ensued.
He's one of these needy narcissists who everything has to be about him. Everything, and he has to be constantly in the news and constantly stroked. He awful man. Yeah.
Alrighty, I've just got a few more questions. I've got a couple of listener questions, people that knew I was talking to you today that wanted me to ask you a couple of things, if you don't mind. One is from Science Abroad, who wants to know if early life exposure to pathogens can have an impact on later life in humans, whether it's a negative or positive impact on the immune system.
Yes, there's this whole theory of the too clean hypothesis that kids who are raised in a very, very clean environment, don't get out and eat a bit of dirt and so forth, will have their immune system will go in the wrong direction. Not so much that it won't work, but it'll be developed in the wrong direction. Basically, any normal kid who goes to preschool will get that exposure, and we're not lacking it. The vaccines of childhood don't stop you getting that exposure. There's a whole lot of viruses of kids, parainfluenza viruses, respiratory syncytial, all the respiratory viruses and stuff that kids get where there are no vaccines. So they'll get plenty of infection. It's part of life, and we don't want to be too clean. You don't want to cover everything in disinfectant or disinfect your child. But it's not a reason for rejecting vaccines, because the vaccines are against truly terrible diseases like whooping cough and diphtheria and polio. Terrible.
The potentially deadly diseases. So essentially, you're saying that exposure to some pathogens within reason at a young age is actually beneficial to the immune system.
Yeah, no, that's been around for quite a long time. And basically, another virus I'd particularly mention, because many people underrate the potential severity of this infection, is measles. Measles can do a lot of damage. It's another one of these viruses that gets in the blood and goes around the body and the blood. That's how it gets to the skin and causes the spots.
Absolutely. And also, Eli would like to ask you, he wants to know why they tweak the flu shot every year. If you could give a brief description of why they change that every year.
The reason we keep changing the flu viruses is because the flu main proteins keep changing. It's basically antibody-mediated selection. We get immune escape variants, and we get what we call seasonal influenzas, where an escape variant will go around the world of one of the existing pandemic strains. But the virus is changing all the time, and you need to get your protein tailored to the antibody response. Now, that's where COVID has basically defeated us, because it changes so quickly. And there are multiple variants of COVID currently circulating in Victoria, for instance, Melbourne, and across the planet. And the virus is circulating. The Chinese are getting tens of millions of new cases a day. The numbers are going up in Victoria. And we've got about, I think, 2,500 people in hospital still. The less severe disease, Omicron variants seem to be less severe, and people are heavily vaccinated, which is probably priming their T-cell compartment, which doesn't change that much, the stuff I worked on. But it's still important to be regularly vaccinated if you're over 60. You need to be regularly vaccinated.
Is that for influenza? Would you recommend the influenza vaccine to...
No, I'm talking about, both for influenza. Anyone, the very young can be very susceptible to influenza. Unlike COVID, the very young aren't that susceptible to COVID, but to influenza they can be very susceptible and they can die. So they need to be vaccinated, and then older people need to be vaccinated. But sometimes we get severe flu years in young adults and very fit adults. And that 1918-19 was like that. Fit young adults were dying of it. Maybe the older were protected by another variant that had circulated before those people were born, and they didn't get it nearly as badly.
So very old people and also very young people are susceptible, but also most adults are susceptible to most diseases. So I guess everybody just get vaccinated for everything. Or don't. Whatever. I'm not your father. I also had a listener question from Pablo, who wanted to know if the Libertines are ever getting back together. Sorry, Pablo, but I think that's a different Peter Doherty. And Eleanor also sent in a question, but it just said, "Oh my God, you're interviewing Peter Doherty?" So thanks to those listeners for sending in their questions. If you want to ask your questions to the experts, follow @TravellingScience on Instagram, where I'll keep you updated on the type of experts we'll be interviewing each week. And you can send in your questions there. All right, almost ready to finish off. I've just got a quick lightning round of just a few questions, and you can sort of just give a quick, simple response, just whatever comes to your brain. But before the lightning round, every week here on Travelling Science, we donate to a charity of the guest's choosing. And this week, Professor Peter Doherty has chosen to donate to the Smith Family Foundation, a charity that helps underprivileged children receive a proper education. So a donation has been made to the Smith Family Foundation, and if you'd like to make a donation to them as well, you can find them online or in the show notes below. Alrighty, fantastic. So the first question is, what is the most misunderstood thing about immunology?
Loads of stuff. There's a lot of crap out there. You take this herbal supplement or something, and it'll improve your immune system. None of this stuff's ever been tested. Maybe there's some effect, maybe there's not. Expensive urine, a lot of it.
This one actually hurt me a bit because I have many YouTube videos all about the herbal supplements that can improve your health. But rest assured that those videos are all based on scientific evidence. So, yeah. What did you love about being a scientist? What was your favorite part?
My favorite bit is looking at new data and making sense of it. Many scientists don't like to write, but I like to write because it's how I think things through. So writing and looking at new data and seeing something different, that's really exciting because you're seeing stuff that no human being has ever known before.
Perhaps something unexpected.
Yeah, sometimes very minor, sometimes of major interest, and that wins Nobel Prizes.
Absolutely. What was your least favorite part of being a scientist? What was the worst part of the job?
It's a good job. You have to work in institutions. In many ways, my personality is such, I'd probably prefer not to work in institutions. But you kind of become institutionalized because you need that support. I mean, you can't do it by yourself anymore. Not the sort of stuff you can do in your garage or with a little hammer wandering around in like a 19th century citizen scientist. That must have been fun, but...
Yeah, the world is definitely changing. Do you have a favorite pathogen? Something you enjoyed researching?
The first one I worked on, leptospira, is you look down a microscope. These are these spirochetal organisms. So they're like a coil, and they go like this. They're really good to look at.
It was so wholesome to see this nice old man reminiscing on fond memories of his early days in science. And if you're listening to this, you can check out the video on the Travelling Scientist YouTube channel to see his precious smile as he makes the coil shape with his finger and zooms it across the screen. Oh, that sounds incredible. And last question, if you had a infinite budget, say $1 billion or something crazy like that, where would you like to see the money put? What sort of experiments would you like to be funding?
I wouldn't restrict it at all. I'd put it out there with a very good committee for smart people with smart ideas, people with different ways of looking, and I'd put it out there for the arts and the sciences, quite frankly, because I think human creativity is what it's about.
I love that. Fantastic. All right, Peter Doherty, Professor, thank you so much for coming. I do have one more question I'd just like to let you sort of finish on. Considering everything that we've discussed here today, what would you say is the number one piece of advice that you would give to listeners, to something they can act upon today to go home and improve their lives or improve the planet as a whole?
Well, basically, the lesson for a satisfactory life is engage. I mean, engage with your professional activity. If you're trained as a professional, with a doctor or a lawyer or a vet or anything else, your primary job as you're trained is to be a good professional, if that's the profession you're going to follow. So be competent, because there's nothing better. We all know this. It doesn't matter whether it's the plumber or the surgeon. There's nothing better than someone who does their job properly. So be a good professional. But be curious, be open, take every advantage of every educational opportunity and challenge. It's challenges that teach you. Don't get locked into dumb ways of thinking. Don't believe in myths. Try to find out what their reality is.
So there you have it, legends. Those were words of wisdom from National Treasure Professor Peter Doherty. I think something he touched on several times throughout our conversation was that it's important to be open-minded and search for the truth. Don't get stuck believing myths, lies, and conspiracy theories. Do your own research, look for genuine evidence, and find out the true reality. And that's what I'm trying to bring you here every week on Travelling Science. Techniques and ideas that are proven by science to improve your life and delivered to you from the researchers and the experts themselves. So I look forward to speaking with you next Science Sunday, when I'll be here interviewing another outstanding science communicator. And if you listen to the end, I'll always leave you with a bonus secret. And this week's secret is that about 7 months ago, I went to Japan, or at least I tried to. I went to the airport, I took my bags, I was all ready to go, and I actually tested positive for COVID at the gate. So they sent me home, and I had to go home and sit in my room by myself for a whole week. And it was very lonely and depressing, and I didn't tell anybody. I was so embarrassed. So next time you go traveling, get vaccinated, get tested, and make sure you get on that flight. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to Travelling Science, the show that's sharing science with the world. I'll catch you legends next Science Sunday. Cheers.